Hello fans, welcome to Country Cat. Today we will talk about the movie, Green Book.
Jesus Christ. Scudo's out of his mind.
The story begins in New York City, 1962. Lip Vallelonga is Copacabana, his nightclub bouncer. He is known as Tony Rip because he is an amazing liar. He does what it takes to put food on his family's table. When the two men get into a fist fight, the man throws one of him out into the street and punches him several times in the face when he refuses. Club is closed for several months for renovations, leaving Tony unemployed. He and his wife Dolores struggle to pay the rent and keep the roof on his two children's home. When two black men come in to fix the sink, Dolores gives them lemonade, and Tony throws away the used glass. Tony makes ends meet by winning $50 in a hot dog eating contest. An old contact gives him an interview as a doctor's driver, and he goes to Carnegie Hall for the interview. He goes to the venue by mistake, but finds out that there is an apartment on the second floor, richly decorated and filled with objects from all over the world. Dr. Don Shirley. He is a concert pianist, not a doctor. He's been on his tour of concerts from the Midwest to the Deep South, and he doesn't have a driver's license, so he needs a driver. Don in particular was looking for someone who could handle the difficulties. He knows there is something against him. The tour will last him 2 months and will end just before Christmas. He asks Tony if he can move away from his family, and Tony agrees to suitable money. However, when Don insists that Tony iron his clothes and shine his shoes, Tony refuses, saying he is not a butler, and Don fires him. Tony goes to a bar, upset that he ruined the interview, and some gangsters he knows at the club offer him an unpleasant job. He lies and refuses, saying he saved money. Early the next morning, Don calls Tony's house and asks to speak to Dolores. He asks her if she's okay with her husband long gone. When she agrees, he offers Tony the job. The record company rented Tony a nice car, gave him half the money up front, and told him he would get half at the end of the tour. If Don missed the show, he wouldn't get the money. They also give him the Green Book, a guidebook and a list of safe places for blacks in southern states isolated by Jim Crow. Tony is loud and talkative and gets on Don's nerves while driving. As they approach the first tour stop, Tony suggests using a different surname so that he can speak better to the guest, but Tony says that if there is a problem with the way he speaks, we say to wait outside of what we are doing. From outside, he sees Don playing the piano and is struck by how good he is. In the car, Tony plays modern music on the radio, but is shocked that Don doesn't know popular music like Aretha Franklin. Tony drives past Kentucky Fried Chicken, and when he finds out Don has never eaten fried chicken, he pulls over. Shirley playfully tries chicken. Tony is working on a letter to Dolores, but it's terrible, so Don helps him make the letter more poetic and beautiful. At a later stop, Tony finds a jewel for sale on the floor and pocket it. Tony disagrees, but Don tells him it's stolen and tells him to put it back.
I picked up a rock off of the ground I steal from.
Don is forced to stay in a black-only hotel separate from Tony. Alone at the motel, Don drinks alone at the hotel away from other blacks. Tony receives a call in his room that a skirmish is taking place at a local bar, during which he finds Don being attacked by rude white patrons. Tony picks up a gun and insists he will shoot if he doesn't let go. They barely escape and Don asks if he really has a gun. Of course Tony says no and orders Don not to go anywhere without him. At the next concert in the South Mansion, the host is very kind to Don. The chef made fried chicken for dinner. During a break, Don asks to use the bathroom. The host directs him to the annex and does not allow him to use the indoor bathroom. Don refuses to use the outhouse, so Tony takes him back to the hotel. At the next stop, the two pass a suit shop, and when Don admires the suit in the window, Joe insists on buying it. That night, Tony was called into a commotion at the local YMCA where Don and another local white man were arrested. It appears the gym manager caught them fistfighting. Tony bribes the cops into letting Don go. In the next town, Tony meets a gang. In Italian, They tell Tony in front of Don to quit and work for them, and Tony agrees to meet her later that night to have her drink. When they check into a hotel, Don offers Tony a raise and promotion. Tony refuses to accept and Don reveals that he speaks Italian. Tony explains that he will never take the job. He awkwardly apologizes to Tony for the situation the previous night, but Tony explains that he has worked in New York City nightclubs for years and that he knows the world is complicated. Don continues to help Tony write letters that continue to impress Dolores and the rest of his family. One night, they were stopped by local police on their way to their final destination somewhere in Mississippi. And both he and Don are arrested and put in jail. In his cell, Don is furious with Tony. Don demands a phone call as he has committed no crime. The police let him in. Moments later, the police receive an angry call from the governor and reluctantly release both Tony and Don. Don reveals to Tony that he called U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy. I think Tony is great, but Don is mad. He is now ashamed that someone so important sees him as an instigator. The two men have a big argument over all the differences. Don sees Tony as a man who refuses to improve. Another hotel's final concert venue, where Don is ushered into a small closet they call his dressing room. Tony goes to eat with the band's players in the dining room, but when Don arrives to join him, the concierge refuses him to eat there. Don refuses to play. The concierge won't let him in and Tony pulls him aside to talk to him. Tony tries to persuade him, but the concierge tries to bribe him into playing. Don walks in and tells Tony he'll do the show if Tony wants it. I know Tony won't get paid if they don't finish the tour. However, Tony stayed with Don and despite the concierge's yelling, they walked out. They walk down the street to a black bar. Don buys him a drink and shows him a wallet full of money. This is what some black youth see. After some prodding, Don plays piano in a jazz band. As they leave, Tony finds two young men waiting in the back of their car to ambush them and fires 2 shots into the air to scare them, reveals he had a gun the whole time. Tony and Don start the drive, hoping to be back in New York by Christmas Eve. The weather is bad and it is snowing a lot. They are stopped again, but this time the cops only warn them that the tire is slipping. Tony, unable to stay awake and can barely see through the snow, is unable to return home. She accepts and sleeps, but while she sleeps, Don drives her to Tony's apartment. He wakes up Tony and invites him to go home. Tony invites him but he declines. Tony goes upstairs and surprises the family. Don returns to his glamorous apartment, where he sits alone. He eventually comes to Tony, and while most of his family is a bit confused, Dolores happily welcomes him in and thanks him for helping with Tony's letter. The afterword reveals that Tony became Copa and Dr. Mighted in real life, while Shirley continued to find success in music. They remained friends for life.